Ladies and gentlemen, today we gather to reflect on a fascinating chapter of American history. The trade between mountain men and Native American tribes was far more than a simple economic transaction. It was a rich and ongoing process of cross-cultural exchange that shaped the identity and survival of both groups in the American wilderness. These interactions took place in a time when both communities relied heavily on cooperation to navigate the harsh realities of frontier life. For the mountain men, European American fur trappers, explorers, and adventurers, contact with Native American tribes offered not only physical sustenance and shelter, but also crucial knowledge of the land, survival techniques, and spiritual perspectives. Native tribes, in turn, were exposed to new materials, tools, and concepts that were previously unknown to them, allowing them to adapt and integrate some aspects of Western technology into their own lifestyles. But beyond material goods, these trade relationships fostered an environment of mutual observation and learning. Mountain men learned indigenous languages, customs, and values, often participating in tribal rituals or even marrying into native families. Native American tribes, meanwhile, adapted certain aspects of European clothing, weaponry, and goods into their daily lives while still maintaining their distinct cultural identity. This blend of cultures led to the emergence of unique hybrid communities, particularly in areas where prolonged trade and cooperation were common. The act of trading also carried symbolic weight. It was a demonstration of trust, a sign of diplomacy, and a gateway to building alliances. Some trade gatherings evolved into seasonal rendezvous where dozens of tribes and fur traders gathered not only to barter, but to exchange news, stories, and traditions. These were spaces where respect and etiquette played a central role, where a poorly handled exchange could sour relations, while a generous trade could solidify friendship and mutual dependence. In this way, trade was not just about acquiring goods. It was a living dialogue between two worlds. It provided a rare opportunity for people from vastly different backgrounds to come together, share their strengths, and bridge the vast cultural divide that otherwise separated them. This type of exchange helped lay the foundation for what would become a complex and often fragile relationship throughout the 19th century, where moments of peace and cooperation existed alongside periods of misunderstanding and conflict. Among the most sought-after trade items exchanged between mountain men and Native American tribes were metal tools, simple in appearance, yet revolutionary in function. Items such as knives, hatchets, axes, awls, and cooking utensils held enormous value in Native societies, especially because they offered efficiency and durability far beyond what traditional bone, stone, or wood tools could provide. Before the arrival of European-manufactured metal goods, many indigenous communities relied on flint, obsidian, or other natural materials to create tools. While highly effective in their own right, these tools required constant sharpening, broke more easily, and demanded considerable time to produce. The introduction of metal changed that entirely. Knives became indispensable in daily life, used for hunting, skinning animals, preparing food, crafting clothing, and even in ceremonial practices. Axes and hatchets made the construction of homes, canoes, and defensive structures significantly faster and more reliable. Small metal tools like awls, used for piercing leather, revolutionized clothing production, allowing native artisans to create more intricate and efficient designs in less time. In some tribes, these tools were also integrated into rites of passage and gift-giving customs, where the possession of a fine blade or axe could symbolize status, bravery, or a connection to foreign knowledge. For mountain men, trading these tools was both strategic and practical. They often carried an assortment of manufactured goods, purchased or acquired before their journeys into the wilderness, knowing that such tools would be in high demand. In return, they received furs, hides, horses, and safe passage through unfamiliar territory. The quality of the metal tools also served as a statement. Tribes would compare the sharpness, durability, and craftsmanship of a mountain man's goods to determine whether he was a reliable and respectful trading partner. What made these tools even more significant was their role in transforming not only how tasks were performed, but how societies functioned. As Native American communities incorporated metal tools into their daily routines, they were able to increase their productivity, expand their hunting ranges, and strengthen their physical infrastructure. This adoption did not diminish their traditions, but rather enhanced their ability to thrive in a world that was increasingly influenced by external forces. The integration of metal tools reflected a willingness to adapt, an example of how innovation, when exchanged with respect, could empower rather than erase indigenous knowledge. Firearms, along with the gunpowder and ammunition required to use them, were among the most transformative and controversial trade items exchanged between mountain men and Native American tribes. These powerful tools of hunting and warfare carried enormous symbolic and strategic weight, as they represented not just a new technology, but a dramatic shift in the balance of power, both within and between indigenous societies. For many Native American tribes, the introduction of firearms changed the way they hunted, defended their territory, and negotiated their place in a rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape. Before firearms were introduced, hunting was conducted with bows, arrows, spears, and other handcrafted weapons, all of which required immense skill, patience, and proximity to the target. With the arrival of muskets and later rifles, hunters could take down game from much greater distances, increasing their efficiency and reducing risk. This gave tribes who had access to firearms a significant advantage during the seasonal hunt, which in turn strengthened their food security and economic standing. Skins and pelts acquired through more efficient hunting could then be traded back to the mountain men, creating a cycle of exchange that further deepened the relationship between the two groups. In the realm of warfare, firearms were a game changer. While many tribes initially viewed guns with curiosity or caution, they soon realized the immense tactical benefits they offered. Tribes that obtained firearms earlier than their neighbors often gained a temporary upper hand in intertribal conflicts. This led to shifts in alliances, rivalries, and territorial control, sometimes igniting old disputes and at other times compelling peace through deterrence. Some tribes became highly strategic about how many firearms they acquired and from whom, seeking to maintain a careful balance between power and diplomacy. However, the introduction of firearms also brought new complications. Ammunition and gunpowder were not easily made by native communities and had to be continually supplied by outside traders. This dependence created a vulnerability, one that mountain men were well aware of and, in some cases, exploited. Some tribes found themselves strategically reliant on friendly relations with certain traders or forts to ensure a steady supply, making politics and trade increasingly intertwined. For the mountain men, firearms were also critical for their own survival, not just for protection from wild animals and rival trappers, but also as a form of leverage in negotiations. By controlling access to guns and ammunition, they positioned themselves as indispensable partners in the trade economy. Yet, many were also wary of overarming local tribes, especially in regions where tensions were high or where misunderstandings could quickly escalate into violence. The firearms trade was thus complex and delicate. It was never just about the weapons themselves, but about the networks of trust, strategy, and influence that they created. The sound of a musket shot on the plains or in the forest echoed far beyond the moment. It marked the beginning of a new chapter in the relationship between indigenous communities and the advancing frontier. Trade beads and decorative items might seem trivial when compared to weapons or tools, but they played an essential and deeply symbolic role in the exchanges between mountain men and Native American tribes. These colorful, often intricately crafted beads carried far more than decorative value. They were embedded with cultural, spiritual, and diplomatic significance. In fact, in many cases, beads were considered as valuable as metal tools or even firearms, depending on their quality, color, and origin. Beads, especially glass beads imported from Europe, came in a variety of vibrant hues that were not commonly found in the natural materials previously used by indigenous artisans. The availability of colors like deep blue, bright red, emerald green, and opaque white added a whole new spectrum of possibilities for personal adornment and ceremonial use. Native Americans skillfully integrated these beads into clothing, jewelry, belts, headdresses, moccasins, and other regalia. These items were not just accessories. They were visual representations of identity, status, tribal affiliation, and spiritual beliefs. For many tribes, beadwork was a form of storytelling. Each pattern held meaning, and each color conveyed emotions or represented natural elements. When mountain men traded beads, they weren't just giving away ornaments. They were offering tools that would be transformed into meaningful expressions of cultural heritage. These beads quickly became part of dowries, offerings during important tribal events, and markers of honor or achievement. A warrior might wear a beaded necklace given to him after a successful hunt or battle. A child might be gifted a beaded pouch to mark their passage into a new life stage. In this way, beads were integrated into the spiritual and social fabric of native life. Additionally, beads served as a form of currency in many indigenous economies. They were portable, beautiful, and easily divided, making them ideal for both large and small transactions. Certain styles or colors, such as cobalt blue or white hearts, were more coveted than others, and mountain men who carried these types of beads were often seen as valuable trade partners. In turn, they would receive pelts, food, handmade goods, and guidance across unfamiliar territories. Mountain men also came to appreciate the craftsmanship and significance of these beaded creations. Some adopted pieces of native beadwork into their own attire, not only for utility, but as a sign of camaraderie or respect. Over time, a kind of shared visual language emerged, where both cultures influenced each other's fashion, art, and ceremonial design. Beyond their material and aesthetic value, trade beads were tools of diplomacy. Offering a strand of beads could signal peace, request an alliance, or show gratitude. In tense situations, such a gesture might ease conflict or open the door to dialogue. In this way, beads functioned as both currency and communication, quiet ambassadors of peace and mutual respect, passed from hand to hand across the frontier. Textiles and blankets were among the most valued trade goods exchanged between mountain men and Native American tribes, not simply for their practicality, but for the profound cultural and symbolic roles they came to play. These items represented warmth, comfort, status, and craftsmanship, making them highly desirable in both everyday life and ceremonial practices. At a time when survival in harsh climates was a constant challenge, the ability to obtain durable, weather-resistant fabrics was nothing short of transformative. Before the arrival of manufactured textiles, many native communities crafted their own garments from animal hides, woven plant fibers, or furs. These materials were incredibly functional and often beautifully decorated, but they were also labor-intensive to produce and limited by seasonal availability. With trade, mountain men introduced woolen blankets, cotton cloth, and woven fabrics that could withstand cold winters and harsh conditions while also being easier to sew and adapt. Wool blankets, in particular, became prized possessions. They were warm even when wet, long-lasting, and versatile. Some were used as bedding, others as cloaks, robes, or even shelter coverings. One of the most iconic examples of this trade relationship is the Hudson's Bay Point blanket, recognizable by its colored stripes and high-quality weave. These blankets became status symbols among many native tribes and were often exchanged during negotiations, weddings, and gift-giving ceremonies. They weren't merely utilitarian. They became embedded in tradition and cultural expression. A beautifully colored or patterned blanket could signify wealth, respect, or spiritual significance depending on how it was worn or used. Mountain men understood the value of textiles in these exchanges and often carried bolts of cloth in different colors and textures specifically for trade. Bright red, blue, or patterned fabrics were particularly popular, as they allowed native seamstresses and craftsmen to create striking, meaningful garments that blended traditional designs with new materials. Clothing made from traded textiles began to show up in both ceremonial and daily wear. Shirts with broadcloth, skirts with patterned trim, or vests lined with colorful wool. These textiles didn't replace traditional clothing, but were rather incorporated into it, creating a blend of indigenous and European American aesthetics. This blending of material culture spoke to the adaptability and creativity of native communities, who took foreign materials and made them their own. Blankets and fabrics were often cut, stitched, dyed, and decorated with beads or quill work, reflecting a continuity of traditional values even as new materials were introduced. Textiles also had symbolic uses. In many tribes, a gifted blanket could represent an offer of peace or a gesture of honor. Blankets might be laid over the shoulders of a respected elder, a visiting leader, or a bride and groom. They were used to wrap newborns and the deceased, present at both the beginning and the end of life. Thus, these items gained layers of emotional and spiritual meaning, making them far more than just physical protection from the elements. The exchange of horses and, to a lesser extent, other forms of livestock was one of the most significant and transformative aspects of trade between mountain men and Native American tribes. While horses were originally introduced to the Americas by the Spanish in the 16th century, by the 18th and 19th centuries, they had spread far and wide across the continent, especially among the tribes of the Great Plains, the Rocky Mountains, and the Southwest. By the time mountain men entered the scene, horses were not just a part of Native American life. They had become integral to the very structure of many indigenous cultures, economies, and identities. For many tribes, acquiring horses fundamentally changed their way of life. What once required days of walking and hauling now took only hours on horseback. Horses expanded hunting territories, allowed for faster travel, enabled more effective warfare, and revolutionized the mobility of entire communities. Buffalo hunting, in particular, became much more efficient and far-reaching with the aid of horses. Tribes could now follow the herds more closely, carry more meat and hides, and move their camps quickly across vast plains. In essence, horses became a symbol of freedom, power, and wealth, and tribes that had access to strong, fast, and healthy horses often gained prestige among their neighbors. Mountain men, who often came from backgrounds in farming, ranching, or frontier life, sometimes brought with them different breeds of horses or livestock that were unfamiliar to local tribes. These animals, whether used for riding, packing, or breeding, were highly desirable in trade. In return for a sturdy pack horse or a young colt, mountain men could receive furs, food supplies, safe passage through tribal territory, or even the protection of a particular band. In some regions, mules and donkeys were also valued for their endurance and ability to carry heavy loads through rugged terrain. The trade in horses wasn't only about utility. It also played a critical role in diplomacy and intertribal relationships. Horses were commonly used in dowries, peace treaties, and war reparations. A chief might gift a prized horse to a visiting trapper as a sign of deep respect or alliance. In other instances, a young warrior might trade several horses to prove his worth or win favor with a tribal leader. Mountain men quickly recognized the cultural importance of horses in these contexts and often adapted their own practices to show respect for indigenous customs surrounding livestock. Additionally, the management and breeding of horses became a shared interest between some mountain men and native communities. Knowledge about animal care, saddle making, or even horse medicine was exchanged along with the animals themselves. Over time, certain tribes became renowned for their horse herds, such as the Comanche, Nez Perce, and Crow, raising animals that were not only fast and agile, but well-trained and highly sought after by both native and non-native traders. The presence of horses also reshaped the physical landscape. Trails widened into thoroughfares. Camps became more spread out. Battles became faster and more fluid. Entire ways of life shifted, creating a new rhythm of movement and interaction across the plains, mountains, and deserts. Horses bridged the gap between traditional nomadic life and the rapidly changing frontier, becoming one of the most powerful symbols of resilience, adaptation, and exchange in the history of Native American and mountain man relations. Food and essential provisions were at the heart of survival in the vast and often unforgiving wilderness of early North America. For both mountain men and Native American tribes, the exchange of sustenance was not just a matter of convenience. It was often a matter of life or death. The rugged terrain, unpredictable weather, and long stretches between settlements made food a precious commodity. And in this context, trading for nourishment became an essential act of trust, cooperation, and mutual support. Mountain men, though resourceful and accustomed to self-sufficiency, could not always rely on hunting and foraging to meet their nutritional needs. During long trapping expeditions or harsh winters, their usual supplies of dried meat, pemmican, or hardtack could run dangerously low. In these moments, it was the generosity or strategic trade of nearby Native American tribes that often kept them alive. In return for goods like metal tools, beads, or cloth, mountain men would receive smoked or dried meat, corn, beans, squash, nuts, berries, or even specially prepared food items like maize cakes or herbal teas known for their medicinal properties. Pemmican, in particular, was one of the most valuable foodstuffs traded. Made by native women, it was a high-energy, long-lasting blend of dried meat, fat, and sometimes berries, ideal for travelers who needed lightweight, durable nutrition on the go. Mountain men quickly adopted pemmican as a dietary staple, recognizing its efficiency and the skill that went into its preparation. In fact, many came to rely so heavily on indigenous foods that they began to prefer them over the more basic rations they brought from forts or trading posts. But food was more than just sustenance. Sharing a meal or offering food during a trade meeting had deep cultural importance. Among many tribes, eating together symbolized peace, acceptance, and goodwill. Mountain men who respected these customs often found themselves welcomed into camps, invited to ceremonies, or granted safe passage through tribal lands. These shared meals often opened the door to broader negotiations and helped build personal relationships that would prove invaluable in future interactions. Native communities, in turn, sometimes benefited from the mountain men's access to provisions that were rare or exotic to the region. This might include flour, sugar, coffee, salt, or even preserved fruits brought in from trading posts or frontier towns. While such items were not necessary for survival, they were appreciated as luxuries and were sometimes used in feasts, ceremonies, or as special offerings. The taste of coffee or sweetened bread could bring novelty and enjoyment, and mountain men who brought such items often found themselves in high demand during their visits. Additionally, mountain men learned much about local food sources from native communities, how to identify edible plants, where to find game, how to prepare fish, or how to use herbs for health and healing. These lessons were not simply tips for convenience. They were lifelines in a world where one wrong decision could lead to starvation or illness. Through these exchanges, knowledge was passed from generation to generation, tribe to trapper, and back again, building a rich, practical network of survival that stretched across the wilderness. Food and provisions, then, were far more than trade goods. They were expressions of hospitality, signs of alliance, tools for diplomacy, and bridges between worlds that might otherwise have remained isolated. In every meal exchanged and every bite shared, a bond was formed, one rooted in the deepest human instinct of all, to survive and to help others do the same. Tobacco, alongside the smoking pipes used to consume it, became one of the most influential and culturally significant trade items exchanged between mountain men and Native American tribes. Its introduction, although initially a simple agricultural exchange, grew to have far-reaching impacts, not just on trade but on social and ceremonial practices. Both groups quickly recognized the profound symbolic, spiritual, and medicinal significance of tobacco, which would eventually lead to the development of complex trading patterns and cultural exchanges centered around this particular item. Tobacco, native to the Americas, had already been used by indigenous peoples for centuries before the arrival of European settlers. In many native cultures, it was considered a sacred plant, used in rituals, offerings, and prayers. The smoking of tobacco, often in ceremonial pipes, was believed to be a way to connect with the spiritual world, a form of communication with the divine, or a symbol of peace between different groups. When mountain men began to engage in trade, tobacco became a highly coveted commodity that not only served as an enjoyable recreational substance, but also as a form of diplomacy and mutual respect. For Native Americans, the arrival of European-manufactured tobacco was a significant event. While they had grown and used their own varieties of tobacco, the tobacco offered by the mountain men was often of a higher quality and easier to process. In exchange for this superior product, native communities would offer valuable goods like furs, food, or horses. The sheer quantity of tobacco brought by the mountain men made it even more appealing, as it could be used for both personal consumption and as a valuable item in trade negotiations. Smoking pipes were equally significant in these exchanges. The act of smoking itself was laden with cultural meaning. In some tribes, smoking pipes were not merely tools for smoking, but were intricately crafted works of art, often made from stone, wood, or bone. They were passed down through generations, inherited as heirlooms, or used in special ceremonies such as peace talks, treaty signings, or wedding celebrations. The pipes themselves could be decorated with elaborate carvings, precious stones, or feathers, signifying their importance. Mountain men, recognizing the cultural weight of these objects, often traded for and collected Native American pipes, some of which were used to mark important events in their own journeys or acted as a symbol of their relationship with the tribes they encountered. In the context of trade, smoking pipes and tobacco became more than just physical goods. They were powerful tools of diplomacy. The sharing of a pipe often symbolized peace, trust, or the beginning of an important negotiation. A mountain man who offered a pipe to a tribal leader might be signaling a desire to trade or to establish friendly relations. On the other hand, a Native American chief who offered a pipe would be extending the hand of peace, signaling that both parties could come together without fear of conflict. These symbolic gestures were often backed by the exchange of other goods, but the tobacco and the pipe made the ritual of peacemaking tangible, setting the stage for the trade that would follow. Moreover, the introduction of tobacco and pipes by the mountain men influenced not just trade, but also social interactions. Among native communities, the presence of tobacco became integral to many daily rituals, gatherings, and meetings. It was shared among friends, relatives, and leaders as a way to bond, reaffirm alliances, and celebrate special occasions. Over time, some tribes became known for their tobacco cultivation and specialized pipe-making skills, developing their own unique varieties of tobacco that were traded not only with mountain men, but with other tribes as well. As time passed, tobacco continued to play a critical role in mountain man and Native American interactions. While some tribes used it exclusively in ceremonial contexts, others incorporated it into their everyday lives. It was smoked during moments of rest, exchanged as a gift, or used to mark significant moments in both personal and tribal history. The simple act of sharing a pipe transcended its physical nature, weaving a thread of connection between different cultures. It was not just a trade good, but a medium through which both groups expressed respect, friendship, and cultural values. Metal tools and weaponry were arguably the most sought-after and essential items exchanged between mountain men and Native American tribes, marking a critical turning point in the way both groups interacted with their environments and each other. The introduction of metal goods into Native American communities radically altered the landscape of daily life, hunting practices, warfare, and even diplomacy. While stone tools and weapons had served Native peoples for millennia, The arrival of metal implements brought with it advantages that reshaped the social, economic, and cultural fabric of many indigenous societies. For the mountain men, metal tools were not only practical necessities for survival, they were also prized trade commodities. Whether in the form of knives, hatchets, axes, or awls, these metal implements had a marked advantage over their traditional stone or bone counterparts. Metal was more durable, more versatile, and more effective for a range of tasks, from cutting wood to preparing hides, making fire, or building shelter. For mountain men living in the wilderness, having access to high-quality metal tools was a matter of life or death. The ability to trade these goods with native tribes provided a constant stream of valuable items that could be exchanged for pelts, horses, food, and other resources. Knives, for instance, became one of the most valuable tools traded between mountain men and Native Americans. The sharp, durable edges of metal knives allowed for easier skinning of animals, cutting of plant fibers, and crafting of other tools. These knives quickly became indispensable to many native communities, who began to use them not only for practical purposes, but as ceremonial gifts, trade items, and symbols of status. Some tribes, such as the Lakota and Cheyenne, came to rely heavily on metal knives for both personal and communal use, adapting them to their own cultural practices. Axes and hatchets were similarly transformative. Indigenous peoples had traditionally used stone or bone tools for chopping wood, but the advent of metal axes drastically improved efficiency and effectiveness. This had profound consequences for both survival and economic practices. Metal axes enabled quicker construction of shelters, larger and more complex trade goods, and more effective hunting and trapping systems. Wood, once a labor-intensive resource to gather and prepare, became more easily accessible and usable in large quantities, opening the door to new possibilities in terms of trade and construction. The exchange of firearms also had a monumental impact on the balance of power and warfare between mountain men and Native American tribes. Rifles, muskets, and pistols brought by European settlers and mountain men gave indigenous groups new advantages in hunting and battle. These firearms were more accurate and powerful than bows and arrows, and they allowed hunters to take down large game from a greater distance. Tribes who acquired firearms quickly realized their potential for defense and warfare, altering traditional battle tactics and territorial disputes. However, the arrival of firearms also brought new challenges, including the need for ammunition and gunpowder, which became additional items traded in subsequent exchanges. As mountain men continued to supply Native American tribes with firearms, the dynamic of intertribal warfare shifted. Some tribes, such as the Comanche and the Apache, became renowned for their use of firearms in warfare, gaining a competitive edge over rival groups who had not yet acquired guns. In turn, tribes that were armed with rifles began to hold more influence in trade negotiations, as they were perceived as stronger and more capable of defending themselves and their territories. The balance of power in the region began to shift not only due to the acquisition of firearms, but also because of the emerging role of weaponry in shaping the way Native American tribes interacted with one another and with the encroaching settlers. While metal tools and weapons provided significant advantages, they also had a deeper social and cultural impact. The arrival of these items led to the development of new rituals, ceremonies, and trade customs centered around the exchange of metal goods. For example, knives and guns were often given as gifts during important ceremonies such as weddings, peace treaties, or initiations. They became symbolic representations of relationships between different groups, carrying with them the promise of protection, trade, and cooperation. In some cases, a prized firearm or a beautifully crafted knife would serve as a sign of respect, friendship, or even alliance between a mountain man and a tribal leader. Furthermore, the trade of metal goods became a cornerstone of economic life for many tribes, often influencing the value of other trade goods. Furs, for instance, were frequently exchanged for firearms and metal tools, creating a kind of cyclical economy where each party relied on the other's goods to thrive. The availability of metal goods, particularly weapons, also contributed to the formation of new tribal dynamics, as some groups with access to better weaponry gained power over others, leading to shifting alliances, conflicts, and rivalries. In conclusion, the trade between mountain men and Native American tribes was not just about the exchange of goods. It was a complex, multifaceted relationship that deeply shaped the history and development of North America. Each item traded, whether it was horses, tools, food, tobacco, or weaponry, carried with it layers of meaning, influencing not just survival, but social dynamics, culture, and diplomacy. Through these exchanges, both the mountain men and Native Americans found ways to adapt, innovate, and survive in a rapidly changing world. The legacy of these trades continues to echo in the histories of the tribes, the mountain men, and the landscapes they inhabited. The products they exchanged were more than commodities. They were tools of connection, cooperation, and sometimes conflict, weaving a complex tapestry of human interaction that altered the course of history. Today, as we reflect on these exchanges, we gain a deeper understanding of how trade, culture, and human ingenuity shaped the Americas and continue to influence us in the present day.